Hey, it's Lynn, and today I'm coming at you with a book review on Earth, We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. I read this one both as a physical book and an audiobook through Libby, and I'll say this up front. This is one of the rare occasions where I'd push you toward the audio version first, because Vuong narrates it himself, and there's something about hearing his voice move through the prose that adds a layer of vulnerability that the text alone can't quite replicate. So, let's get into it. At its core, this novel is a letter, an entirely extraordinarily intimate one, written by a young man named Little Dog to his mother Rose, who cannot read. That central paradox is the beating heart of the entire book. A confession addressed to someone who will never receive it, a love letter written in a language the beloved does not speak. Little Dog is a Vietnamese American boy growing up in working class Hartford, Connecticut, the son and grandson of women who carried the Vietnam War in their very bodies. His nickname comes from an old belief that calling your child something small and worthless makes them invisible to the spirits who steal beautiful children. And so Little Dog internalizes that smallness, that sense of being monstrous or other, even as the prose he constructs around himself is anything but. The narrative moves the way memory moves, non linearly, doubling back on itself. We are carried through fragments of his grandmother Lon's life, her flight from an arranged marriage during the war, her brief love affair with an American soldier, the way that encounter ripples forward through generations. We also follow Rose, Little Dog's mother, who immigrated carrying wounds that never quite healed, who works grueling hours in a nail salon, and whose trauma occasionally erupts in ways that fracture the very child that she loves most. And threading through all of it is Little Dog himself. Bullied, isolated, beginning to understand the contours of his own desire, searching for language to hold things that have no easy name. The second half turns toward his first love, a boy named Trevor, the son of a tobacco farmer, whose tenderness and volatility are wound together in ways that feel devastatingly true. Their relationship unfolds against the backdrop of the opioid crisis sweeping rural America, and what begins as something luminous and private is slowly pulled under by addiction, poverty, and the particular cruelty of a world that has no language for what they are to each other. The novel never announces its themes, it lives them the way people live their traumas, not as grand narratives, but as textures. The smell of a barn, the weight of a hand, the silence after a name is spoken into an empty room. What struck me most immediately was the quality of the prose. Vuong is a poet first, and it shows in every sentence, not as ornament, but as architecture. The images accumulate meaning across the novel's arc, so that something as ordinary as monarch butterflies or a tobacco barn becomes a kind of emotional shorthand by the final pages. Reading this novel felt less like consuming a story and more like being gradually altered by one. The female characters, Lon and Rose in particular, are where the novel does its most quietly extraordinary work. Little Dog writes about them with a reverence that never tips into sentimentality, which is a difficult balance to strike. They are flawed in ways the narrative form does not flinch from, and yet Vuong renders them with such deep, earned empathy that their complexity feels like a form of love rather than indictment. He understands intuitively that these women's brokenness was not their essence, but their inheritance, that war and displacement and poverty had shaped them into people who sometimes could not love the way they meant to. There is something profoundly generous in that understanding, and it made the first half of this novel absolutely luminous. The treatment of intergenerational trauma is also one of the most sophisticated I've ever encountered in contemporary fiction. Rather than presenting trauma as something that happened and then ended, Vuong shows it as a continuous living thing, passed from grandmother to mother to child, not through intention, but through the body and through reflex. There's a moment early on where Rose, startled by a childish prank, grabs her chest in terror because her nervous system still lives inside the war, decades later and oceans away. That image, small, almost a throwaway, tells you everything about how this novel understands suffering. It doesn't explain, it shows in the way only the best fiction can. I was also deeply moved by the novel's meditation on language itself, on who gets to tell their story and at what tongue. The use of you throughout, addressed always to Rose, creates a strange doubling effect. You're constantly reminded that you're standing in a space meant for someone else, reading a letter never intended for your eyes. It feels almost voyeuristic and intimate, and somehow, despite that, it speaks to something universal in you anyway. That is genuinely extraordinary thing for a novel to accomplish. And I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't return to the audiobook version one more time. Vuong's own narration doesn't perform the text so much as inhabit it, unhurried, deliberate, giving each sentence room to breathe. Lines that register as elegant but contained on the page become something rawer when spoken in his voice, carrying the weight of someone speaking about their own life through the thin veil of fiction. If literary prose sometimes feels distant to you, this particular audiobook might be the way in. That said, I want to be honest about where the novel lost some ground with me. The second half, which turns more fully toward Little Dog's adolescence and his relationship with Trevor, did not hold me with the same intensity as the first. This isn't a criticism of the subject matters, which Vuong handles with his characteristic moral seriousness. It's more that Lon's and Rose's lives had set such a high bar that stepping away from them into Little Dog's more inner adolescent landscape felt, comparatively, like trading something electric for something quieter. The women of this novel are so fully realized that their absence was genuinely felt in the second half. I also want to be transparent about the reading experience itself. There are passages in this novel that are genuinely difficult, not in the way challenging literary fiction asks you to sit with ambiguity, but viscerally heavy in a way that required me to pause, set the book down, and step away. This is not a failing of the novel. In many respects, it speaks to how effectively Vuong does what he sets out to do, but it's worth knowing that this book will ask something real of you emotionally, and there will be days when you simply don't have it to give. And finally, let's talk about the hype. This is a book that the bookish community speaks about with near reverential devotion, and going in with that level of expectation is its own particular hazard. On Earth, We're Briefly Gorgeous is undeniably beautiful and accomplished. But beauty and accomplishment don't always translate into deep personal resonance. For me, this was a book I admired more than I loved. I admired Vuong's craftsmanship enormously. Certain passages genuinely moved me, but I did not feel by the final page that it had rearranged something inside me, and the books I hold closest to me always do. And that's okay. Not every great book is a right book for every single reader. So with that said, I give this novel 4 out of 5 stars. For a book this celebrated that might feel almost heretical, but honest criticism means honoring your own experience of a text rather than ratifying the consensus. The first half is some of the most beautiful prose I've read in contemporary literary fiction. The female characters are unforgettable. The language, at its best, stops you mid sentence and makes you read it again just to feel it one more time. So, a 4-star rating isn't a dismissal, it's recognition that this is a significant, skillfully constructed piece of literary art that simply didn't move me as profoundly as it has moved others. I'd still encourage you to read it, especially if lyrical, emotionally demanding fiction is your natural habitat. Just go in with open eyes rather than outsized expectations, and maybe queue up the audiobook first. And so that leads me to you. Have you read this one? Did it land differently for you? If you haven't read it yet, are you planning on it? Let me know down in the comment section below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You are awesome, stay awesome, and I will see you in my next video. Goodbye.